Alright, so back on here on YouTube for another review. This time it is for the Daredevil Black Armor comic. Now I'm pretty sure this is a mini-series from what I've been seeing from the comic itself, but also from some research online that this is a mini-series. I'm not actually sure what issue this is, but yeah, you can tell in the comic that it does pick up from a certain point. But I'm not sure what the entirety of the overall miniseries is, but I know in this comic, it's kind of dealing with, from what it seems like it's dealing with Daredevil and kind of the place he's in now. Like, this is like Daredevil, of course it's Daredevil when he was wearing his black armor. So this is during that hiatus when he was faking his death, which I actually forgot that he did do that. Because I opened up the comic and I was reading, and I saw people talking to him, and they were calling him, what were they calling him? They were calling him something else. I can't remember. It wasn't Matt, but it was something else. And it kind of reminded me of Daredevil's twin from, I don't know if he's still a thing in Marvel, but Daredevil had a twin. His name was Mike Murdock, and he was like this fake, well, at first he was a fake persona that Matt was using, but then somehow, some way, I don't know, he ended up becoming a real person, and it was a whole dilemma. It was a weird time for Daredevil comics. Not a lot of people liked it. I'm pretty sure they killed Mike off. That's what it reminded me of, because in the comic, Matt faked his death, like, or not Matt himself, but Daredevil faked his death and made it seem like, oh, the original Daredevil's dead, so is Matt Murdock. And so he made some new friends, and they called him by this other name. I'd have to look back in the book and see, but yeah, they were going around calling him other names, and like he created this whole other new suit so he could play off the whole idea that this is a new Daredevil, and it's not the same Matt Murdock Daredevil. And it's funny because a lot of people in the comic are actually like, they're making fun of him because the first time he makes the suit, he goes to see one of his people that makes the suits for him. Let me see. His name was, I think, let me see. His name was, yeah, Melvin Potters, the Gladiator. Yeah, so he makes his suit, and he's like, this is what you call armor, because, on the suit itself, you got the little kneecaps with armor, and then there's some on the shoulders, and then some right here on the arms. And people were just making fun of him all throughout the comics, like, that's what you call armor? He's like, I never called it that. And it gets frustrating too. I think that's funny. But it was a cool little comic. The whole premise of it is that someone is going around New York and kidnapping people, and they're having them fight in like this underground ring. And it turns out to actually be Baron Strucker that is going around doing this. Of course, Baron Strucker works for Hydra. And he's going around, he does capture Daredevil. And he seems to be one of the only people, if not the only person in the comic, who realizes that, or not realizes, but knows this isn't another Daredevil. This is Matt Murdock. But yeah, I'm actually not too sure why Matt faked his death and is getting on this whole persona of, oh, like, this is a new Daredevil. I'd have to go back and read the other issues of this little mini series, because I'm not too sure. But so there's that. But the comic has some really cool points that I want to like point out too. There were some certain points in the comic. Hold on, there was a point where he met, when he meets Spider-Man, and of course you can see it right here. He's swinging with Spider-Man, and some of the stuff he says, it's like right here, one of them, he's like, you call that armor? Where he's making fun of him, but right here where it says, like most, he's talking about Spider-Man, and when they're swinging together, because of course Peter doesn't know this isn't Matt, right? And he says, like most everyone, Spider-Man believes Matt Murdock is dead. He does his best to keep his voice casual, but there's no hiding from hypersenses, quiver in pitch, uptick in heart rate, micro tensions in the muscles. This is one suspicious wall crawler. Who's this armored Daredevil, and what is he capable of? I think it's funny to me because it's like, Peter is like, he'll try to deepen his voice or whatever to try to make it seem like, it ain't him to people. When he's swinging around and he saves somebody that he knows, they'll have a little scene sometimes where like he talks to them. They'll be like, thank you, Spider-Man. And he'll be like, you're welcome. And then he'll go like, he'll like fix his voice and like, thank you, and try to deepen it. That's kind of what I imagine what's happening right now with him and Spidey. But then there's another part of the comic too where they're talking, and he tells them that the relationship, but he tells them about how the previous Daredevil, right, cared for this neighborhood, right? He's like, I don't know how much this neighborhood means to you, but the previous Daredevil, it mattered a lot to him. And he's talking to him. He's like, he tells him his little story. He's like, he used me as bait to catch serial killers in a nightclub once. And then Peter was not Peter. Matt was like, sounds like a special relationship. And then Peter was like, it was, and I feel like Matt in that moment is thinking to himself like, damn, like, the webhead really does care, you know what I mean? And of course it's Spider-Man, he cares about everyone, but I feel like it also kind of puts into perspective, Matt's relationships with a lot of different with a lot of different heroes and just people in the Marvel universe in general. And I wish we would have got to see that more. I mean, maybe in some of the other issues, maybe there were a couple instances where he interacted with some other characters, but I do like that it is Spidey, because in my opinion, Spidey and Daredevil's relationship is one of the best relationships in Marvel. I just love relationship, and I cannot wait to see that in the MCU. But yeah, because when he looks at it, when before he faked his death, of course, the relationship they had, he looked at it, at base value as it was right there. But now he looks at it at a different perspective in a different way. Now that it is the fact that that is the original Daredevil. Of course, it's Matt Murdock, but they don't know that. Spider-Man doesn't know that, and so he's saying all these things, and it really puts in his eyes, that he may these may just be kind of these things that just happen between these different heroes and all, but it's a lot more than what it is than meets the eye, especially with Spider-Man, with someone like Spider-Man who cares so much about pretty much everything and everyone. You know what I mean? He's kind of like, well, I wouldn't say he's like Superman in a way, but almost, that he always tries to see the good in somebody. You know what I mean? Because there have been so many instances in the comics where Peter is fighting somebody, especially if because a lot of times with Peter's villains, they're people that he knew before they became who they were, like Green Goblin. Peter knew who Green Goblin was before he was Green Goblin. He knew Norman Osborn. Of course, he was best friends with Harry, so of course he knew Norman. The same thing goes with Doc Ock. He knew Otto before that. He knew a lot of his villains before they were who they were, and it puts a different perspective on him. When he's fighting them, sometimes he doesn't want to fight them. He'll try to get through. He'll try to get to them. Through these different talks and stuff when they are fighting. For instance, when there's been times where Harry has been the Green Goblin, those are some of the best fights that I think Peter, as the character Spider-Man can have, because the stakes are so much higher. Of course, Peter doesn't kill, obviously, right? And a lot of times too, when the going gets tough, he gotta, really like, because, Peter pulls his punches, right? Obviously, because Spider-Man is extremely strong. He's unbelievably strong, but he pulls his punches because, he doesn't want to hurt anybody or, potentially kill anybody, which he definitely could. But when he's fighting somebody, that, he really has to kind of put some hurt on him, he's going to like, not pull his punches as much. But it's a lot different when it's somebody like, like the Rhino or the Shocker or somebody they compare to, Norman as the Green Goblin, or someone like Ned Leeds as the Hobgoblin. Those people, and I'm not so much as Ned Leeds, but I guess sometimes Eddie Brock, when the relationship kind of got when it kind of got closer than it was way back then. You know what I'm saying? And so he kind of is put in this position where it's like, I don't want to hurt my friend, because him and Harry are lifelong friends. I mean, these dudes all practically grew up together. They went to high school together. In some versions, this dude has started a business together, and Harry has run it for him at times when he wasn't there. So when you're fighting somebody just like, like I said, the Rhino, the Shocker, or Boomerang, it's a little different. But when you're fighting someone like Harry, then you really want to be careful what you do, because yes, this dude is out trying to murder me, but at the same time, this is my lifelong friend. And I don't know, it just goes to show his relationship, with everyone. Because then again, too, you look at it with the way it is with this new Daredevil. Of course, Peter doesn't trust him as much, and of course, obviously Daredevil can see that, because he does mention it in the comic, that he says this is a very suspicious wall crawler. But I don't know, it's just, I don't know. I kind of went off on a little rant with Peter, but it just I love that perspective. I love what he says about him. So there was that part. Another part I want to point out too is that the time placement on this comic. This comic definitely does take place before Devil's Reign, obviously, right? I knew that when I first looked at the cover of the comic with the black armor, because when I first saw it in Barnes and Nobles, I almost thought this was the Shadowland armor. I don't know why. I guess I just immediately saw the black, but it's not, because the Shadowland armor or the Shadowland suit is pretty much all black with the double D's on his chest, and that's like the only red part on him. But yeah, if you don't know it takes place before Devil's Reign, you should know by the time you're reading this. By the time you're done reading this comic, because it does say in the middle when he goes to meet Kingpin, at that warehouse, he's talking to him. He's like, they're saying something, and he's like, you should be, you should run for mayor. Basically, what he's saying, and Kingpin kind of remarks on the idea of running for mayor. Kind of a little bit of foreshadowing to the eventual, of course, Devil Reign storyline where Kingpin does become mayor. Another part, probably the biggest part I want to talk about, probably the final part I want to talk about, is all throughout the comic. I think, let me see, does it start in the beginning, or when does this actually start? I think it starts... towards the part where we start to get more of the story. I'm pretty sure. But all throughout the story, for the most part, when we get past kind of like what's going on with some of the friends he's made now, because there's like a plot line, not a plot line, but a kind of mini story where he's helping his friend out with this legal issue. There's probably more on it and more of the issues, but I'm not even sure where in the story this really is. But throughout the story, he's getting flashbacks to his dad, because his dad, Jack Murdoch, was actually he was a boxer down in Hell's Kitchen. And of course, Matt was blinded at a very, very young age. And so he gets these flashbacks to him in his dad's boxing gym. And he's like, you have these instances where like his dad is up there sparring with somebody. Of course, he's blind at that point. He's young, so he's still trying to get used to the whole him being blind. And his senses still aren't as attuned, because this is before he met with Stick, who of course is the one who trained Daredevil and helped him hone his senses, after the loss of his sight. But I find it so can't even think of the word I'm trying to look for. But I find it so awesome that they use these flashbacks to kind of show you as if almost like his dad was training him, because he's in the ring and he'll be like in the locker room, or he'll be like sitting down outside the ring or something, and he's listening to his dad give these commands, to the or like he's fighting and he's hearing the commands being given to his dad and the fighter, and he's listening and interpreting these skills and using them, for his own self. Or he'll be like just listening, and then like his dad will be instructing somebody in the ring, and he's listening to all these calls and all these different fight moves. And there was actually a point when he got another flashback. He's in the locker room when he's young, and he's listening to his dad give these call outs. And as he's giving these call outs, he's matching the moves, like, back and forth. And I find it's such a cool, use of like Matt's, upbringing as his dad, as a boxer, to kind of help him with how he is now and the way he fights, and that he even still uses them to this day. Because there's a point at the end of the comic where he's fighting Baron, and he finally fights Baron. He puts the suit back on, and he's literally like because like the fighting arena is in a boxing ring, I'm pretty sure, if I can remember. But he's sitting in the boxing ring, and it's a still image of Matt, and behind him is like the silhouette of like his father, and he's like, it's just me and my dad, or something along those lines. I gotta find it. It's such a cool. It is such a good. It's such a good image. Let me see if I can find it. Let me see. Yeah, right here, when he's fighting, and right when Baron gets in the ring, when he's like, it's been many years since I could, but I imagine I see my father's face again. And he says, and it's my father's voice, it's my father's voice I hear guide me. And right here is what I was talking about, where it's Matt, and it's him beating the shit out of Baron, and it's his father right here, matching this exact same pose, guiding him. And it's like, it's just so awesome, dude. Like I can't, bro, because literally all throughout the story, he's getting flashbacks to back when he was young, when he first lost his sight, and he's fighting and he's with his father. Look, right here. Or they're in the ring and he's listening to all the call outs. Like I said, his father instructing the fighter what to do, and he's listening to it, and he's just mimicking everything, and he does that like almost like every day, all day, and he's getting that repetition in his mind, and of course that leads him to become who he is now and the fighter he is now, because his father was a big inspiration to him, and I just love that, you know what I mean? And right here he says, it should be hard to follow what my father's saying, but even though I'm hidden in the locker room, it sounds like he's right here. Of course, because his sounds are his senses are finally getting attuned and properly trained the way they are. We see all these years later. And he says right here, he's listening to his father. His father says the fight can change in the corner between rounds. And then Daredevil follows along and says, feeling my senses, turning me into the ring to find where I've got the upper hand. Every son wants his dad in his corner. And again, another perfect image. Of course, young Matt and his father right up here. And I love these flashbacks all throughout the story. But those are some big points I just wanted to like hit on. But in and of itself, the story itself, I can't really give my full thoughts on it because I would have to read the previous issues for the Black Armor story, which I will try to find them. I will see if I can find them online and see how long this is. But overall, I thought it was a pretty fun story for what it was, because of course it kind of was like in the middle of everything. So again, I don't really remember why he had faked his death or anything like that, but I thought it was a pretty cool comic, and I liked it. I mean, I literally got back to my friend's house and immediately sat down and watched, and not watched it, but read it. Probably took me about, I don't know, like what? Like 20, probably like 30 minutes, probably. If they didn't even feel that long, but there's so much good stuff in this comic, and that was one of the biggest points I wanted to point out. Like, I love that type of foreshadowing, and I just love that type of development in the character. And it really shows you his development, because Matt was very timid and he was very shy. He didn't have no confidence in himself, until of course when he lost his vision, and then of course had to make up, in areas. He had to make up in certain areas to provide for that lack of vision that he didn't have. And having his father like that, in his head, now all these years after he is gone, he is Daredevil fighting with him. It's just what makes Daredevil such just a lovable character, and I feel like this comic really does give you that. But yeah, man, beautiful artwork, beautiful writing. Who did write this comic actually? I think it was DG Chickster, I think. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but yeah, this is a really good comic. I loved it. But those are just some of the key points I liked in the comic and overall and all of that. But yeah, if you want me to review any other comic, let me know. I'll try to either go out and find it or pull it up online, or hell, I may have it. I don't know. But yeah, just quick thoughts and reviews, and yeah, thanks for watching.